Okay, now it says great.
Excellent.
Now I'm just refreshing. Okay.
Right.
It says we're live with 12 seconds going, so
Awesome. I guess we're live.
good morning. I'm going to leave it in this view, I think. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah,
Sure.
whatever works. This looks good.
I feel it's kind of weird because I want to be a presenter, but we're talking to ourselves. But hi for the BookTube universe out there. Oh, hi, Danny. Good morning.
Hi.
So good morning. Welcome to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. If you're new to my channel, my name is Kim, and I focus on everything bookish and foodie. Remember that food books are not necessarily cookbooks. And I am joined today by Rosie. Rosie, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi. Thank you. I should really know what to say at this point for these things, but I never do. I talk about books, some food related, mostly not, but I read a variety of fiction and nonfiction, and I like to think my niche is that I'm interested in pretty much everything. I mean, I'm sure there's many things that I'm not interested in, sports, but for the most part, like food, culture, history, politics, economics, like very niche things hold my interest very well, even if they're not related to anything else.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, like I think that's a pretty good explanation because I don't focus in on any one thing. It's just like everything. Is it cool? Let's talk about it.
You're the far more relatable booktuber then, because I'm like, hi, this is my niche. I live in this little box, but I am trying to read food fiction, which is a big step for me, but that is not what we're talking about today.
No.
I'm also going to sneeze, and this is, I don't know what to do in this.
Bless you.
Apologies. So today we are talking about our March buddy read, which is, there we go. Live is a lot harder when you don't know your camera. American Cuisine by Paul Freedman. American Cuisine and How It Got Its Way. So first question I have, did you read this, listen to this, and what did your book look like?
I read it on ebook, so I can't show it to you, but it did not look like that. It was like a dark blue cover with a small image and lots of white text.
I think that's the hardcover version, and I have to say that cover is ugly.
It's ugly, and it makes the book look a lot more intimidating than it is. I think the cover that you have better represents what this book actually is when you read it.
Yeah, I saw this on a shelf, and I was like, this is a beautiful cover. And it was like very striking. I like simplistic covers. I've seen the hardcover, and it looks very academic, which is, for me, makes me really sad because I think a lot of people think food writing can be very textbook heavy. And I'm like, no, I promise, like, this is wonderful. So some quick stats about the book. This book came out in October 19th of 2019. It was published by Live Right Publishing Corporation, which I believe is now under WW Publishing, and it comes in at 528. It comes in at 528 pages, but I think like the last third are notes, like whole citations, which is a really good thing. It means he did his homework. So I would say that the actual reading portion is like 380 pages. That sound about right?
That sounds pretty accurate. I mean, it's still a long book. I think it took me probably, and I noticed these things because I watched it on my Kindle and it like tells me, how much I have left and stuff.
Oh, I didn't know Kindles did that.
Yeah. It'll be like based on the speed that I'm reading something, it says, oh, it's going to take you, another hour to read the rest of this chapter. And like, so I think it took me probably on the order of 12 or 13 hours to read this book, about an hour a chapter almost. I guess, probably 10 hours actually, because it was about an hour a chapter.
That's how long it took me on audiobook, about 12 to 13 hours, which I am also not a 1.5, 1.25. I can't.
Same. I want to hear the actual, like, as someone says it.
Yeah, and I think the only book I've ever been able to speed up was The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and that I got up to like 1.25. So when I see people who are watching it like 2 speed, I'm like, go for you. It's very nauseating for me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought I have some like prompt questions since I read this all
Ooh.
the time, but I wanted to see how you thought and to explain to an audience who's maybe newer to food writing. What did you think of, these are very easy questions, don't worry. What did you think of the pacing of the book?
I thought for me, it was really good pacing. There were a few chapters where I didn't find the organization to be ideal, but for me, it wasn't too slow. It wasn't too dense. It was like, yes, they're long chapters, but it's not long because it's going into minutia usually long, or because it's taking 3 pages to say one thing long. It was just, there's a lot of content in this book. That being said, although I don't read a lot of food writing, I do read I wouldn't say a fair amount, a moderate amount of dense-ish nonfiction. So if you're I can see someone coming at this as like a pure fiction reader, or like only ever reads nonfiction in 200-page, pop science type books. Nothing against those. I like those as well. But if you're
Absolutely.
not used to reading this type of book, I can see it feeling dense and long. For me, it was about optimal. It could have been a bit slower and I still would have been fine. If it had moved much faster, I feel like it would have left out a lot of really interesting information.
I completely agree with you. I found this, for the world of food writing, not fast paced, because when I think of fast paced, I think of narrative nonfiction, I think of food memoirs, I think of biographies. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just read a book last month with Danny about Nathan's hot dogs. That one, like, it took maybe 2 or 3 days to get through cumulatively. This one,
Mm-hmm.
I liked the pacing because I did want to reflect on it. And just so everybody knows, obviously this book is American Cuisine and How It Got This Way. It's actually broken up into 3 large sections. Part 1 is American regional cuisine and their decline. Part 2 is modernity, I can speak, but it's modernity up until I'd say like the 20th century. And then part 3 is the Great Transformation, and we're talking about the 2000s and going forward. And then there's a little bit of the conclusion of the food in the year of 2020 and beyond. And that was maybe 20 pages at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So just so you guys have some context for why we're talking about pacing, there are definitely some sections I preferred more than others. And I think you had the same experience, Rosie. But for
Yeah.
adjectives, if I was going to describe this book, it's informative, but I also found it fun and engaging. There's maybe 1 or 2 chapters where I was like, okay, I really just want to get to the end of it. But overall, if you're very new to food writing, like I didn't see a lot of vocabulary that you would have to be like, what does this mean? It was very much like, no, like we start here and we build very slowly. Did you have that same experience?
Yeah. And it was very accessible in the information and how it was presented. Like, again, maybe I'm biased. I like reading nonfiction about things I don't know that much about. I mean, that's why I'm reading this book. But I don't read much nonfiction food writing. I certainly haven't read much nonfiction history food writing type stuff. And I didn't feel like there was anything in here that I needed to do more research to understand, or that was so complicated that it involved, a 5-page technical textbook feeling explanation in order to explain it to a non-expert. It was very much, this is interesting information, it's fascinating, and it's presented in a way that's both clear and, as you said, engaging. Like, it's just interesting stuff.
Awesome. Okay, I think getting all the technical fun stuff out of the way, like I never even use the citations in the back of the book. It's wonderful that they're
No.
there, but to me, that's a good sign of like, if I'm interested in more books and further research, I do cheat and use those kinds of references in the back, but I didn't have to like look up a glossary or anything.
I
I'd
want
love,
the author to have done all that research and
so that I
then
don't have to.
coalesced it well so that I can appreciate it without having to, yeah, go read everything in the glossary in order to understand, or not in the the citations, in order to understand this book.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears. Our favorite parts of the books. My favorite part of this book is actually chapter 7, choose your cake, choose from our 15 fabulous flavors, and then eat it too. And I can't remember if this is the reference point that I always think of is Jell-O, how Jell-O has so many flavors. But to take a step back, the purpose of this chapter was to really explain that as mass market, mass production starts to grow, and we have tons of food everywhere in the market, quality goes down. And to basically trick the consumer, we just make a lot of flavors of different products. And it's interesting for me, and I mentioned it in our Voxer conversation, I work in food. I work for Halo Top Ice Cream. My opinions are my own. Please don't come after my company. But one of the things we think about all the time are line extensions. How do you get a consumer to come back to your product? It's by making more and more flavors. And it was a really interesting debate. And I think the other brand I think of is Oreos. How often do you see a specialty partner Oreo, like the Lady Gaga Oreo, or like the peppermint Christmas Oreo, sorry, the holiday Oreo? And I sit there and I'm like, yeah, but all Oreos are like not that great. Like if you look at the ingredient line and et cetera, like they're really not that good for you. And I think it spawned there's a whole niche section on YouTube about, I tried every single Oreo or every single Lay's chip or every single this and every single that. They're amazing to watch because I would get sick eating them, but I do enjoy eating them. There's a whole Delish sub-series where this poor girl, Julia, like during lockdown, she ate every single Hot Pocket. She ate every single like Hungry Man meal. And I just felt like a train wreck. I couldn't stop watching. It's so amazing. But taking a step back, having different flavors and different options is an interesting way to basically say we're duping the consumer, not to like talk down to anybody, but I wanted to see what you thought about that because I'm very like business oriented.
That was one of my favorite chapters as well because it made me think about my own purchasing and my own food habits more than the rest of them. I think that was the one where I felt was the most like, if you're going to read one chapter from this book and you want it to actually impact your life, not just, be interesting information, that's the chapter to read. And this book in general, and that chapter in particular, made me question how much I think I'm not buying into the marketing and the, mass-produced food culture and all of that stuff when I really am. And so I do want to touch on Oreos because I've actually just had a unique experience. I've been gluten-free for 10 years now. Yeah, 10 years
I'm
now.
only like 8 months in.
Okay, yeah. So I've been gluten-free since I was a teenager. And actually, if you see my vlog that's coming out Sunday, I actually just got to try the gluten-free Oreos because they've just been released. And I'm not ashamed to admit, I've been seeing online that everyone's like, they've been out in the US for like since January, and I finally got to get them, and I got them. And yeah, they're really fucking good. They're designed to be really fucking good. I guess I shouldn't swear. This is still YouTube. I keep forgetting we're not in just a Zoom call. So yeah, they're delicious. They're Oreos. They're great. They're they're better than the natural equivalents that you can get.
Yeah.
But by the end of the pack, you're also sort of like, okay, but I bake a lot because I don't have access to a lot of affordable, treat foods. Like cookies are so expensive and they're not that good.
Yeah, guys, like we can sometimes pay like $6 to $7 for a loaf of gluten-free bread. And
yes, and it's tiny. It's like this big.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I guess it doesn't rise because there's no gluten for it to work with, but you're like, this is like a toast point, and I want like a hungry man's sandwich.
Exactly. So, especially in the last year, actually, I've gotten really into baking and like baking my own baked goods and cakes and cookies and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not that good, but I'd rather spend $7 on ingredients and produce a really great batch of chocolate chip cookies than spend $7 on cardboard with unsweetened, no dairy chocolate chips in them because, sorry, I'm so off track now, but everything gluten-free is also, of course, dairy-free,
Or
nut-free,
vegan, yes.
or vegan. And it's like, I get the appeal. I get that it makes sense that those are all small markets. So you don't want to try and market the just gluten-free ones and the just dairy-free ones.
Yes.
Sure. But like, I want a really good treat food. I want it with butter, not, you know, some weird, who knows what oil product. I want real sugar. I don't care about the sugar. I'm having a treat. I just don't want something that's going to give me cancer in it.
Yeah, which fun fact.
Not because I think gluten gives everyone cancer. I'm actually celiac and like sensitive. But anyway, so sorry, I've lost completely track. I've gotten so into gluten-free food now that I've lost track of where I was going.
To reel it back in, we were talking about
thank you.
mass varieties of different products, and I'm seeing in the chat everyone is freaking out about Kit Kats too. And I'll admit that Kit Kat, at least in my opinion, globally introduces global flavors, which is a little bit different than double stuffed Oreo, triple stuffed Oreo, regular Oreo, oops inside out Oreos, oops inside out double stuff. So I'm going to give Kit Kat a little bit more credit than Oreos. But to your point, when I've had the gluten-free Oreos, I can admit that they're a great treat. But I still have the box. Like, I haven't finished my Oreos. So to me, it hits an itch, but it's an itch based on like this American cuisine, the times of like, we are raised on sugar. Americans, sugar is the number one priority. So sometimes I can only have 2 or 3. And then I'm like, okay, like, did I really enjoy it? And then the marketer in me will go down the whole spiral. Because I could tell you every marketing campaign, like, why they position it that way. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to go bake my own cookies. But to your point, this is a big book. And the good thing is it's chronological, but for everyone in the chat, you can easily just read a chapter and walk away from it because it's a standalone chapter in a place in time. And I think that was one of my favorites. But Rosie, I think earlier I don't remember what chapter title it was, but the role of regional versus international food, because we had just talked about it in our Feasting Females live show, which you guys, if you haven't seen, it's linked in my channels and you should go check out that hour-long conversation. That was one where we both were like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known about this. And I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that chapter.
Again, that was another one that it made me think about my own habits a lot. I think it talked about, well, one of the big things was I'm Canadian, so North America in general. I think once you get past the really like historic stuff, basically everything in this book can go for either America or Canada. There's the thing now of we don't want Canadianized Chinese food, right? We want authentic Chinese food. We want to go where, you know, the Chinese immigrants eat. We want to, and how that in and of itself is a commodity was, again, something I feel like I should have realized before now, but was put in such an interesting and insightful way to make you reflect on like, oh, how is all of this working? So I don't know if I have a conclusion about that right now, but that was a really interesting chapter. What was your take on that? Especially as someone who I think grew up eating sort of immigrant fusion food.
Yes.
If I can put it that way.
Yes, you're totally the right term to use. So if anybody who doesn't know is new in my channel, I am half Persian, I am half Iranian. My dad was from Iran. So I did grow up with a lot more of other spices, other foods. I think the book does a great job of contextualizing that when different immigrant groups come to America, they bring their own food, and oftentimes they would ask their family who's traveling over, smuggle me in this ingredient, smuggle me in fish sauce, things that weren't readily available in the United States. And then they would live in their very niche communities, often in like slum-like housing. And then eventually the rich, let's just be honest, the rich and the white would look for something exotic and then really fall in love with things. But there is a devil's advocate of, well, things become Americanized because if I can't find fish sauce, I'm going to use soy sauce. And if soy sauce isn't here, et cetera, et cetera. I actually just listened to a podcast episode by Gastropod, which is a food and science podcast. Highly recommend. And they're talking about Thai food. And one of Miss Mary was like this white diplomat who was sent to Thailand. And when she came back, she was like, oh, you don't have this? Use sour cream. And the Thai people were like, oh my God, like, no. But eventually, like, things just evolve, and that's what happens. So I'm not against the evolution of food. What I'm against is more the appropriation of food, which I don't think Freedman goes into great detail of it. But it actually ties back to chapter 3, which was about the community cookbooks. And I swear there's a point to connect these two. But the community cookbooks, the first early cookbooks that come out in America are written by white women. You know who did all their cooking at the time? They're Black slaves. So they literally take these recipes, use them as their own, and then distribute these books throughout America. And they're part of American history. When in reality, they were never even in the kitchen. They had slave help that did all of this for them. So that's kind of the distinction I'm trying to draw in the sand. And I think that might be personal to me, but I mean, the example I always use is like there's 2 Persian dishes that I despise. Grape leaves and kukuzabzi, which is a herbed frittata. To me, as a kid, it was like eating grass. So my mom would add things that we would like. So I'm okay with that part of it. What I'm not okay with is when you read those cookbooks from the South, especially, you're just like cringy. You're like, I don't think you invented collard greens and pot liquor. Mm-hmm. Awkward.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of it, that I don't want to start boxing people in and say, you're from this part of Thailand, you can only ever cook this part of Thai food, and we can never change it, and we can never adapt it, and you can never be influenced by the environment you're in now. That's not how food has ever worked, and I don't think it's how food should work. As we have access to new ingredients. Yeah, exactly. Every time. People have always been moving throughout history for various reasons with various intents. History isn't static, and food hasn't been static either, right? We talked about this in Feasting Females, right? That like we think tomatoes in Italy, but Italy didn't really start using tomatoes until a few hundred years ago. So anyway, where I'm going with that is it's exactly what you said. It's when you've got the white chef who goes to Thailand for 3 weeks, comes back, opens a Thai restaurant that doesn't seem to be even based in anything, because it's like you don't have the knowledge to riff on this.
Yes.
And gets, loudly acclaimed, the great new thing in Thai food. It's like, well, really? Is that what we want to celebrate? Or do we want to celebrate the people who, learned the rules? Not rules, but, they learned the cuisine and now they're building on it, as opposed to just sort of saying, I ate 3 meals and now I know everything about this.
Yes, and to me, I think it's the difference between on Netflix watching Chef's Table with authentic, some of those stories, and even Chef's Table street food, where you see people, this is my life, this is my stand on the corner, and etc., versus some of the more celebrity chefs and etc. that come through. Let me just pop into the comments. Do you two find that some of the loss of translation recipes comes from no knowledge and a language barrier? Absolutely. I do think language barriers and availability of ingredients do go hand in hand. There are certain words that exist in Farsi, which is my dad's language from Iran, that just don't exist in English, and vice versa. My dad, to the end of his life, did not understand the word receipt and why it had a P in it, and etc. So I do think that is like a loss in interpretation that I think, to Rosie's point, is very natural and comes with diaspora, history, and travel. What I don't like is I don't know how to put it. Like if Mario Batali suddenly opened like a Chinese restaurant. I don't know. Oh, there's more comments. This was such a lively little group today. All this talk about Thai food and white chefs is reminding me of an amazing episode where Gordon Ramsay cooks pad Thai for a Thai chef at the freaking Blue Elephant and gets his ass handed to him. I need to watch that. And I think that's what I want in life. Yes, blatant replacement of an ingredient that makes no bonker sense is Miss Mary saying that Thai food needs sour cream. And you're just like, cringe, 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 cringe. Yeah. There was also a comment in the chat about the introduction of ingredients and why they get rejected, like innards. I can never remember the word for gelatin that came before gelatin, where it was
like
just
aspic.
Yes. Like, I don't know if anyone really liked aspic, but it was a sign of wealth, but I digress. But yes, like I've only recently gotten into innards in the sense that when I broke down a whole lamb a month ago, there are certain things I'm willing to try. I'll try liver, I'll try kidneys. Some things I'm not going to try. I haven't gotten to offal yet. Like intestines, like I haven't gotten there, guys, but I'm trying.
I think I made the mistake of, I'd had liver like once in my life, visiting my aunt's retirement community. It was a mistake. But I dove straight into offal one morning because I was on vacation in Hong Kong, and it was like so many mistakes. It was like, right, I'd had like a 24-hour travel day the day before. I was jet lagged, I was exhausted, and I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? First meal I'm going to eat in Hong Kong.
Oh no!
Congee with offal for breakfast. Which, like, I'm like, looking back, this goes against everything I would ever tell a friend or sibling or something if they were proposing doing this. I'd be like, no, that's a mistake. Don't do that. And the weird thing is, I think it was mostly my own head that was messing with me, not the actual food. Right? Like, it wasn't the meat itself that was bothering me. It was kind of rubbery. It didn't taste like that much. But it was the thoughts in my head of like what you're eating, and that's, you know, so out of the usual of what you eat that, yeah, it's like a huge mental bias that you've got to move past and like make your brain be like, no, listen to your tongue, listen to your mouth, don't listen to 22 years of everything you've seen all around you. And that really does play a big role, I think.
Exactly. The last third of this book was the Great Transformation. We start in the 1970s, and it's really about the golden age of, I like to call it a la Super Walmart. Everything is at your fingertips all the time. Whether the quality is there, I don't know. But chapter 10 and the conclusion is looking ahead, and what I actually observe as a cycle. Now, at the beginning of the book, we talk about the death of regional cuisine. Now we're seeing it come back. The locavore is very important now. And obviously he published in 2019. He doesn't have a future facing look as well. I left the book feeling optimistic. I am someone who, I guess someone would label me as someone who goes to a gourmet food store or a specialty store. But what I'm trying to do is find food that's locally sourced. I'm trying to look at seasonality. I'm trying to be, I'm trying to pay attention to what I put in my body. Now, I also, caveat to the YouTube world, I recognize my privilege. There's a huge, and Freedman touches on it, there's a huge pay scale and difference in opportunity of access to local good food based on being white, having money, and we'll put food scarcity and food apartheid aside for another conversation. But what I am excited to see is the idea that people are looking around, to your point, and they're like, well, what can I make? What can I do? And after reading this book, my final real question to you is, do you have a real understanding of what American cuisine is? Like, is there truly a definition after reading just Paul Freedman's book?
It's a really good question. On one hand, I feel like I have a much more nuanced understanding and like I've been exposed to and thought about the different sides of it a lot more. I don't know whether I could say that there's a definition that comes to my mind, right? Because it's so broad, it's so complex. Not to say that other countries' cuisines aren't broad and complex, but yeah, there's no one thing where you can be like, this wraps up American cuisine. This is it. Everything else is something else, right? It's more, there are so many elements to this, and this is just as much American cuisine as this is. Sorry, I'm gesturing too far. And
I got
neither
you.
one is
I use my
more or
hands
less
all the time.
valid or American than the other, despite being very different.
Yeah, and when we think about it, America's only 244, 245 years old. Maybe part of that's going to come with time if the global supply chain doesn't collapse. I have no idea. We'll also put that aside over in that corner. But I think like that's a good point. And I mentioned how it's cyclical now, regional foods coming back. Maybe after this second era, maybe it means getting through the 2000s to 2100s, 22nd century. I think I gotcha. Like maybe then we'll know. I don't really know how I feel right now. I think as an American, like this is a great this is a great comprehensive look, and I really recommend it. It is probably one of the most fun food history books I have read in a long time. I would definitely recommend reading his other books, which I haven't read yet. One of them is The 10 Restaurants That Changed America. I bought that book, but I'm not allowed to get it till Christmas. There was like a huge sale, and I got that book for like $4, but I tried to make myself accountable and shipped it away to my mom. So, final thoughts. Since you are one of my first buddy reads ever, would you recommend this book? What are you currently reading next, and where can people find you?
Absolutely would recommend this book. If you're a person in North America who eats, you should read this book. You should think about these things. You know, I'm not necessarily going to advocate going complete, I only shop at the farmer's market and eat food grown within 20 miles of where I live. I'd be a hypocrite to do that. I don't do that.
I still go to Jewel Osco and Target, especially finding gluten-free food. It's just not really entirely possible yet.
Yeah, but definitely read what he has to say. Think about where we've come from and think about where do you want to be going? No one person can shape an entire country's food production and consumption system, but it never hurts to think about how am I being impacted by things that I might not think I'm being impacted by? What decisions am I making? Are those the decisions I want to make? Are those the best decisions I can make? Are other things more of a priority? These are all valid answers. I'm not saying, again, that you should read this book and come to one conclusion and completely change everything. But read the book and have the thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a great...
Be conscious of it.
Yes. Have the conversation just like we are. We both have different points of view. We both have different backgrounds. All of that influences the cuisine and the way we interpret it. The same way I think let's be honest, Paul Freedman's a historian and he's a white guy. Maybe he has a different point of view just because he's a man and we're women. Okay,
exactly.
I see two more questions in the chat. We'll answer.
Actually,
you need to run to your next live show?
No, that's not for hours. I'm good. Can I raise one more point that
of course
we didn't talk about, but I think was really interesting in this book? And that's addressing the role of women's labor in food, which wasn't a major component of the book, but was discussed enough to, I think there's an element of part of the reason we're so like, do we like convenience foods? Are convenience foods best? Should we be moving away from convenience foods now? Is that we've come far enough from the point in time where labor, and let's be honest, almost exclusively women's labor, was required to take virtually everything from raw ingredients to something you can eat. And it's really easy in 2021 to look at Wonder Bread and be like, oh my God, why would people want this? Why would you want to eat this? This is no good. Home-baked bread is so much better. And it is. I mean, I don't bake bread because gluten-free flour is too expensive, but like, yes, homemade bread,
$8 a
artisan bread is amazing. But when you think about it not in the context of the bread, which we probably eat a lot less of now as well, but in the context of how many loaves of bread was a woman baking every week to feed her family. And this actually links to another book I've just read, Parnassus on Wheels by Christopher Morley, which is written in like the 1920s, I think, and involves a middle-aged spinster who's been keeping house for 15 years and decides to go off and live her own life. And there's a really impactful thing where she's talking about her brother's literary works, and in the time that her brother's become a great author and achieved renown, she's baked 6,000 loaves of bread.
Jeez.
Over the span of 15 years. She's baked countless rolls and cakes, and every single meal that has fueled this man's writing career has come from the labor of her hands. So again, not to say that I think convenience foods, whether that's cake mix, bagged bread, frozen dinners, have no place in the world, but there is an element of we've forgotten, I think, a little bit, or we have the luxury sometimes of forgetting why they were attractive in the first place.
I completely agree. And I think that even expands to ready-to-eat food. There is nothing wrong with walking into the supermarket and buying one of those pre-cooked chickens with the green beans and the mashed potatoes. I think part of it, to your point, what we're seeing is the next evolution. Now, a lot of households are two working parents. There is no person to put the labor in to bake those loaves of bread. I mean, I have a house cleaner come once a month. And when I first called my mom, I was like distraught. I was like, did I fail as a woman? And she's like, no, you work. I was a stay-at-home mother by choice. I raised my 3 daughters. I was at home. I'm at home now, but that's because of COVID. But she was like, no, and that's why the world is changing. So I do think convenience food does include ready-to-eat food in the store, because I saw that question in the comments. But there's still that's on a different spectrum. Like there's ready-to-eat food, and then there's Twinkies. So just so people understand where I'm coming from. And then what were the other questions in here? Very quickly. That was a really good point, Rosie, and thank you for bringing it up. Totally, I think contextualizing, and that's why it's
close to my heart.
Yeah, that's 6,000 loaves of bread. Like, I really think message me that book. I'm really intrigued.
I will.
Final 2 questions, and then we'll wrap up. How do local chefs like Tom Colicchio, who described their food as modern American cuisine, fall within your context of this book? And then a different follow-up question was, do you find that modern American food is turning into fancy greens on fancy bread, where everything is bougie on every single ingredient? Ooh, 2 really good questions there. I'll start with Tom Colicchio. He is well known for owning Gramercy Tavern. He opened it under Danny Meyer, who is a famous Michelin star restaurateur. Danny Meyer is like one of the kings of American cuisine, at least owning restaurants. I think what Tom Colicchio did with American cuisine and modernizing is that the Gramercy Tavern was about taking away, at the time, the white tablecloths. Come to this tavern, this relaxed space, have a burger and fries, which is considered a very American thing, but elevating it with good ingredients and good resources. So Tom Colicchio is kind of part of the old guard that's now transitioning out, because now locavore and these new modern hipster, I'm just going to call them hipster chefs, but I don't mean that with any condescension at all. I think at the time, in his context, in his time period, it was modern and it was local, but it's like local with an asterisk. He didn't bring you food from China or from Italy. He brought you things he interpreted as American. And in terms of the world of fancy greens on fancy bread, I think that's where the extremist of the locavore and bouginess comes in. And that's also a moment of a comment on like privilege. It is really ridiculous to buy a $12 slice of avocado toast. Now, have I tried it? Of course I did. I wanted to know the hype. I wanted to try it. But that is also a privilege thing. And that goes all the way back to the beginning of American cuisine. If you have the money, you show it off by having certain food at your table. Having a bowl of salt at your table in a certain time period showed you were rich. Having sugar meant you were rich. So there's a little bit of pomp and circumstance, I think, built into all American cuisine that's always going to be there. But at the same time, all it takes is one blogger to take a picture of a chef trying something new with new ingredients to make other ingredients more mainstream. And often those ingredients come from other cultures outside of America. So it goes back and forth. I know it's like kind of a non-answer. I think it's important, but I also acknowledge, and it's come to my attention more and more as I've become this hardcore foodie booktuber. There's a lot of money involved. It makes me feel a little it makes me feel a little scummy sometimes, honestly. Like when I buy organic meat, I'm proud of it because I'm just trying to get away from hormones. Like that's where I'm coming from. But when I look at it side by side, you could buy chicken at $1.99 a pound, or you can buy the organic chicken that I'm buying at like $4.99 a pound. There's classism built into that. Sorry, it was a very roundabout answer, but I think I got to them. And yeah. I love the friendship that has been built in our comments. Just so you know, guys, we've been reading them. It's very sweet.
Yes. No, I agree. I think there's also, I think, in my view at least, a little bit of a distinction between the $12 slice of avocado toast, where, I mean, in my part of the world, this isn't a thing, but like, you know, it's
avocado toast didn't come to Canada?
Oh no, avocado toast did. The next part doesn't. You know, it's more locally grown food or grown with more ethical labor practices. So you're not underpaying immigrant workers to pick your food. And that's part of why you're paying more, or you're paying more because the wait staff is being fairly compensated for their labor, or, you know, it's still a privilege. It's still totally this is not something that's accessible to everyone. And I'm not saying everyone should be buying this, but for me, there's a distinction between I'm paying more for this product and it's going to the people that are producing it, versus I'm paying more for this product because there's a celebrity name on the restaurant and the wait staff is still barely making anything, and you're using the same, you know, maybe higher quality ingredients, but without, does that make sense? I think like
it completely does. And I think tipping and that's a whole mountain. I would love to have that conversation with you. Anybody in the comments who's interested in tipping, there's a great book called Waiter Rant, and it's the memoir of an anonymous professional waiter. He spends his whole life as a waiter somehow. But I think that's a really great point. Okay. I have no more questions other than, would you read more books in the food writing space? You don't have to feel
absolutely.
Yes.
No, absolutely. Like even before reading this one, honestly, if anyone has come to this live from my channel and you're wondering whether you should follow Kim, absolutely do, because literally every video you do, I am amazed by how many interesting, engaging, fascinating books there are in such a small genre. And I will admit, when I first found your channel, I was sort of like, wow, that's really niche. How do you do that? Like, but over time, it's sort of like, oh my goodness, there is so much content here. And that's amazing. And yes, sometimes I am tempted to be like, I should just make a copycat channel and stop reading everything else. But then I'm like, no, I like reading too many different things and I can't commit to one specific thing, but like, yeah, absolutely would like to read more food writing.
We'll just keep doing Feasting Females, and you'll still get your
Yeah.
food writing fix, and then I will learn to read other genres too, which is a big goal of mine for the year. All right.
Yes.
If you haven't already, guys, please make sure you go like and subscribe to Rosie's channel. She also, your Instagram handle is also your name, same thing as your YouTube channel. Feasting Females, hopefully, will be back in May. I'm seeing Amrita is totally on board for this. I think what we've pitched as an idea is reading an article from the New Yorker about prying in H Mart, which will be more approachable for everyone. If you're not ready to read the 300, 400-page book, you can read the New Yorker article. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on my channel. But thank you for joining, Rosie. Thank you for being one of my first buddy reads ever. And
thank you for hosting this, and thank you to everyone who's come. This has been so much fun.
Yes, and if you guys have additional comments that we didn't get to during the show, please leave them, because I will go back and comment, and so will Rosie.
Yes, absolutely.
And also, Rosie's on another live show today, so make sure you go.
Oh yeah, I should plug that as well.
Go for it.
If you're interested in unpaid labor in the feminist, socialist, and stuff side of the world, then I will be on Amrita by the Books channel. She's down in the comments. I don't know if you can click in live show comments, but if you can, do that. We're going to be live at 1 p.m. Eastern Time talking about why women have better sex under socialism, which is another phenomenal book. And I think we're going to have so many interesting things to say about that one. So if that sounds like a topic you're interested in, please check it out.
I will definitely be over there later. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.